A mother named Mary was turned away at the doors of a luxury store in Paris simply because she didn't look rich enough. But just weeks later, her daughter, Jasmine Crockett, a U.S. Congresswoman, quietly bought out the very brand that had humiliated her mother. No one was fired. No one was publicly shamed. And yet the entire fashion industry was brought to its knees. How did one act of quiet dignity shake the foundations of the luxury world? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. Paris was a stranger to her, but on this cold spring morning, Mary Crockett walked with quiet purpose. It was her 76th birthday, and for the first time in decades, there was no one else to take care of. No classrooms to clean, no meals to stretch for one more child, no grief to mask. Just her and a promise. She would not let this milestone pass like the others. Wrapped in a worn brown coat, shoes softened by time, and a scarf her daughter gave her in college, she navigated the stone sidewalks with determination. The city's elegance didn't intimidate her. It intrigued her. Towering above the street like a modern cathedral stood Maison de Coteau, its windows glowing gold, silk dancing behind glass like flames trapped in crystal. Mary stopped, not to browse, not to compare prices, but to choose and to own something beautiful. One scarf, she told herself. She imagined draping it around her neck, not for show, but as a quiet badge of worth. She stepped forward, heart steady, chin lifted, unaware that within 60 seconds, her dignity would be tested in ways she hadn't faced since the days of segregated waiting rooms. But as Mary reached for the door, everything shifted. A man in a sleek black suit stepped into her path, tall, young, polished, and practiced. His posture was crisp, his expression unreadable, but his eyes said everything before he even spoke. They flicked to her coat, lingered on her shoes, traced the faint wear on her handbag. The silence between them stretched like a warning. "Madame," he finally said, voice smooth as marble, "we're closed for a private event." No apology, no hesitation, just a cold wall of words delivered with the ease of someone who's done this before and enjoyed it. Behind the glass, the store shimmered like a dream. Women in designer heels sipped champagne under crystal lighting. Scarves twirled between fingers. Laughter floated in the air like perfume. Mary blinked. "I saw those people go in," she said gently, pointing toward the couple who'd entered seconds earlier. He didn't even glance. "They're on the guest list," he replied curtly. Then came the smile, not kind, not polite. It was the kind of smile that let her know exactly who he thought she was. "You might be more comfortable shopping near the river, the souvenir boutiques." The words hit her harder than she expected. They weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They had the sharp precision of a scalpel. Quiet, clean, cruel. Mary stood still, shoulders squared, hands clenched tightly around the small coin purse in her coat pocket. This wasn't about a scarf anymore. This was about how the world saw her, even now, even here. Her age, her clothes, her skin, all of it weighed and dismissed in a heartbeat. "I just wanted to buy myself a small gift," she said, voice low but steady. "It's my birthday today." He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't care. The door behind him stayed shut, polished and perfect like the world it guarded, one she had never truly been allowed to enter. The injustice burned, not like fire, but like old bruises being pressed again. She could have argued, could have asked for a manager, raised her voice, made a scene. But Mary had lived long enough to know, when a door is closed by judgment, pounding on it rarely opens it. It just bruises your knuckles. So she nodded once, almost imperceptibly, turned and stepped back into the rain. Not defeated, not broken, just tired of fighting for permission to exist where she had already earned her place. And just a few steps away, someone saw it all. Lucille, 19, barely 3 weeks into her trial period at Maison de Coteau, stood frozen behind a marble counter near the entrance. She was restocking display scarves when she heard the security guard's tone shift. That clipped, condescending register she'd heard used on couriers, cleaners, and now, this elderly woman in a brown coat. Lucille's fingers stopped moving. She turned just enough to see the scene unfold. The cold dismissal, the pointed glance at Mary's shoes, the thinly veiled insult wrapped in a smile. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She knew this wasn't just about a policy, it was a performance, a quiet execution of unspoken rules. Her stomach twisted. She wanted to say something, anything, but the memory of her manager's warning echoed in her head. Watch, learn, don't speak unless asked. So she stood there, mute, ashamed and complicit. Mary's soft voice, "It's my birthday today," cut through the luxury air like a cry muffled by velvet. Lucille's chest tightened. She watched as the woman turned, slow and silent, retreating into the rain like a shadow never meant to be seen. Their eyes met, just for a second. But in that second, Lucille saw everything. The quiet hurt, the exhausted dignity, the disappointment of someone who had been pushed out of places like this her whole life. She bit her lip hard enough to taste blood. Her hands clenched around a scarf worth more than Mary's entire outfit. She wanted to run after her, to hand her something, to apologize, but her feet stayed planted, heavy with fear. The store's music played on, the lights sparkled, and the door that should have opened wide stayed shut, sealing Lucille inside a world she wasn't sure she wanted to belong to anymore. Back at the hotel, the lights of Paris flickered faintly against the rain-slicked window. Mary sat at the edge of the bed, coat still damp from earlier, hair pinned back neatly like always. Her fingers hovered over her phone, hesitant. She wasn't one to complain, not after years of learning how to swallow disappointment with grace. But something inside her, something bruised, needed to reach out. She tapped Jasmine's name. The phone rang, once, twice. Then the screen lit up with her daughter's face, poised, powerful, still dressed in a blazer, probably fresh from another meeting in D.C. "Mama!" Jasmine smiled wide, her voice warm and sharp at once. "You enjoying Paris or turning it upside down already?" Mary gave a soft chuckle. "Oh, baby, Paris is lovely. I just walked a bit, got rained on. These old knees don't like cobblestone much." She glanced down at her hands folded carefully in her lap. "Nothing exciting to report." Jasmine's smile faded almost instantly. She leaned in, her eyes narrowing just slightly. Not suspicious, but alert. She knew that voice, that tone, that practiced calm Mary used like armor when something had gone wrong. "What happened?" Jasmine asked, the warmth in her voice cooling into something steadier. Mary hesitated. For a second she thought about lying, really lying, making up a story about sightseeing or a cute cafe. But her throat tightened. She exhaled. "Well, I did try to go shopping," she said, carefully casual. "One of those fancy stores with scarves in the window. Thought I might treat myself to a little birthday present." Jasmine tilted her head. "Maison Decoteau? I think that's the name. Pretty place. Gold handles on the door." "What happened?" Jasmine pressed, her voice now low and precise. Mary laughed, but there was no joy in it, just that brittle, hollow sound Jasmine had only heard once before, when the bank denied her mother a loan years ago. "Well, there was a tall young man at the door. Very polite, very crisp. Told me they were closed for a private event." She paused. "But I saw people going in, fancy people. I waited my turn, but he said, 'I might be better off shopping at the tourist boutiques.'" Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't move. Her silence became something sharp. Her eyes darkened. She understood everything her mother wasn't saying. Mary kept going, as if she had to fill the space before the silence got too loud. "I told him it was my birthday. Thought he'd soften, but no, didn't even look at me after that. So I turned around, nothing to get worked up about." "Mama!" Jasmine's voice was barely audible now. "I'm fine, sweetheart. These things happen." "No, they don't just happen. They're made to happen." Mary looked away out the window. "It's not the first time someone looked at me and decided I didn't belong. It won't be the last." And that was the moment. The precise second Jasmine felt something hot and ancient crawl up her spine. That rage she had only felt once, as a child, watching her mother walk out of a landlord's office with her head held high, after being called a risk. Jasmine didn't speak right away. She couldn't. Her mother's words echoed in her ears, soft, apologetic, brushed off like spilled tea. They said there was a private event. They told me to try the tourist shops. That kind of cruelty always wore a polite tone. Jasmine knew it too well. But what caught in her throat wasn't the words themselves. It was how gently her mother delivered them. Like they were nothing. Like being erased was just part of the travel experience. Jasmine inhaled slowly, but her chest ached. She could hear her mother trying to protect her from the pain, even now. Even after being humiliated, still shielding her, still smiling through the slap. And then the memories came. Fast, sharp, uninvited. She was just a kid, maybe 9 or 10, sitting next to her mother inside a small neighborhood bank in Dallas. Jasmine remembered the scratchy feel of the seat, the way her legs dangled without touching the floor. Mary sat tall, her best blouse ironed crisp, a neat folder in hand filled with pay stubs. Letters of reference, rent receipts. Everything was there, but it wasn't enough. The man behind the desk had clean fingernails, a pale gold wedding band, and a look that never quite settled on Mary's face. He flipped the papers, nodded slowly, and said, "Unfortunately, with only one income and your credit history, this isn't the kind of loan we're confident about." It wasn't the words, it was the way he said them. Dismissive, decided before the folder even opened. Jasmine had looked up at her mother, waiting for her to fight. But Mary just smiled, thanked the man, and took her daughter's hand as they walked back into the hot Texas sun. No tears, no rage, just that quiet, devastating grace. Jasmine had never forgotten. Not that day. Not the time a boutique clerk followed Mary through every aisle. Not the landlord who asked for additional verification after seeing her skin. Not the teacher who once asked Jasmine if her mother could really afford that science trip. And now this, Paris, a place her mother had dreamed of, saved for, finally stepped into, and been pushed right back out by a door that opened for everyone but her. Jasmine clenched her jaw. Her fingers twitched on her desk in D.C., but her voice, when it came, was ice, controlled, precise, the kind of calm that made grown men flinch in congressional hearings. "All right, Mama," she said. "Don't worry about it. I'll handle it." Mary blinked. "Jasmine, really, don't make this into something. These things happen." "No, Mama," Jasmine said, her eyes locked on the screen. "They've been happening. That's the problem." Mary went quiet. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was loaded, thick with years of shared knowledge. They both knew exactly what this was. Jasmine didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to argue. She'd already decided. The look in her eyes had changed. Not hot with anger, cold with resolve, strategic, deadly calm. Because the world had just humiliated the one person Jasmine Crockett had spent her whole life trying to uplift. And that was a mistake, a quiet one, but fatal nonetheless. The moment the call ended, Jasmine sat in stillness, the phone resting quietly on her desk like a sealed verdict. The glow from her office window bathed her in gray morning light, but her mind was already dark with calculation. Her mother had just walked through the doors of Paris, dreaming of silk, and walked back out carrying humiliation. Jasmine knew that pain. She'd seen it before, dressed in different uniforms, a bank denial, a teacher's condescension, a landlord's smirk. But this wasn't just another story of quiet injustice. This was personal, and that made it dangerous, for the people who thought it would go unanswered. She stood slowly. The same hands that once typed policy on criminal justice now typed 3 names into her secure team channel: Henderson, Barlow, Reyes. The message was simple. Conference room, 7:30 a.m., Paris. We're moving. By the time the sun had fully cracked the sky over Capitol Hill, Jasmine was already on her second espresso, standing in front of a glass wall overlooking the city that had taught her power wasn't given. It was seized. Her legal counsel arrived first, clutching 2 tablets and a leather binder. Next came Barlow, her financial strategist from New York, eyes alert, tie half knotted, already scrolling through international property portfolios. Then Reyes, ex-NSA, now head of strategy. No one asked questions. Jasmine didn't summon people at sunrise unless the world was about to shift. She opened the meeting with no small talk. My mother, she began, walked into a store yesterday, Maison Decoteau. A pause, no theatrics, just silence, like the breath before a storm. She was told she didn't belong, politely, systemically, quietly. I'm not here for outrage. I'm here for ownership. Henderson blinked. You want to sue? Jasmine's eyes didn't move. I want to buy it. Barlow sat up straighter. Buy the store? I want everything tied to it. The brand, the building, the landlord, the debt, the chain. If it's public, make it private. If it's owned, find the weakness. I want to hold them from the foundation to the facade. Silence fell again, but this time it was reverent. Jasmine Crockett wasn't threatening. She was declaring war, with paperwork and capital instead of flames. She stepped to the screen behind her. With one tap, it lit up with a Paris map, the location of the store blinking red. Decoteau is bleeding cash, she said. Luxuries shifting post-pandemic. They expanded too fast, too thin. They leased the building. The parent company is leveraged and overdue on their next liquidity report. Reyes whistled under his breath. So we hit them from the back door? Jasmine nodded. We don't shout. We whisper until the ground moves beneath their feet. Teams were assigned. Layers of legal veils were activated. Within 90 minutes, a shell fund in the Cayman Islands was being mobilized under a generic name with no direct ties to Jasmine. Call it Project D, she said. D for Dolores. That's my mother's middle name. And when we're done, her name is the one they'll remember. Outside, the city went on, unaware. But inside that room, a machine had begun to turn, silently, efficiently, like the gears of a clock counting down to something no one saw coming. Maison Decoteau had opened their doors to the rich and closed them to Mary Crockett. Now Jasmine was coming, not to knock. She was coming to own the building and rewrite the locks. The moment Jasmine issued the command, the machine roared to life, silent but deadly. She wasn't playing defense anymore. This was war, and her weapon wasn't rage, it was ownership. Maison Decoteau had wrapped itself in exclusivity for a century, guarding its reputation like a crown jewel. But Jasmine had done her research. Beneath the gloss was instability, supply chain delays, a bloated executive board, and a recent failed expansion into the Middle East that had left investors jittery. The brand was cracking from the inside. All it needed was the right pressure in the right places, and Jasmine knew exactly where to press. She activated Mirador Capital, an anonymous fund she had quietly seeded over the years for one purpose only: moves that couldn't be traced. The structure was sophisticated, multi-layered, and global. No one, not journalists, not regulators, not even her closest political allies, would be able to link it back to her. On paper, Mirador was nothing more than a conservative European investment group shifting portfolios away from volatile markets. In reality, it was Jasmine's scalpel, and Maison Decoteau had just become the patient. The acquisition started quietly. Jasmine's team identified dormant shareholders, retired executives, former designers, silent partners who'd held onto stock for sentimental value, but had grown tired of the brand's slow bleed. One by one, they received private buyout offers, well above market price, no questions asked, wired within 24 hours. Then came the second wave. Distressed equity blocks scattered across Europe and the Middle East, many owned by hedge funds looking to clean house before fiscal year-end. Jasmine's team moved fast, always through intermediaries, always under different corporate shells. Every piece was small enough to stay invisible, but together they were building something massive. By the end of the second week, Mirador held just under 20%. Nothing alarming, nothing that would trigger board review. But by week 3, the tempo shifted. A Swiss pension fund holding 8% suddenly agreed to exit. A Middle Eastern fund offloaded another 9% after Jasmine's team uncovered a quiet compliance issue they were eager to bury. And then came the breakthrough. A German luxury conglomerate holding 22%, Decoteau's second largest shareholder, agreed to sell in full, privately, under strict NDA. The deal closed in 36 hours. That alone pushed Mirador past 50%. Jasmine didn't pause to celebrate. She kept going. Week 4 brought consolidation. Her lawyers moved to secure board voting rights through proxies. Her financial analysts began rewriting supply contracts. Internal HR reviews were triggered across 3 divisions, subtly, legally, but fast. Jasmine had no intention of crashing in like a hostile buyer. She was slipping in through the wiring, rewriting the code of the house while everyone inside thought the lights were just flickering. By week 5, Mirador quietly secured 2 more micro-holdings from northern France and Quebec. The final tally, 61.3% control. Jasmine now owned the controlling interest of a 110-year-old Parisian institution, and no one saw it coming. Not the board, not the staff, not the smug doorman with perfect posture and selective politeness. Every morning he still stood by the gilded door, offering warm welcomes to designer coats and cold stares to plain ones. He had no idea that his uniform, his paycheck, even the marble floor he stood on, now belonged to the daughter of the woman he once dismissed without hesitation. Jasmine kept her name off every document. She didn't want attention. She wanted the reveal. When the moment came, it wouldn't be loud. It would be exact, surgical. She wasn't just flipping a brand. She was rewiring a legacy, one that had built its prestige on exclusion, and now unknowingly had sold its soul to someone who had been excluded her entire life. And she wasn't done. She was just getting started. 5 weeks passed. Maison Decoteau continued spinning, oblivious to the storm growing quietly inside its own walls. The doorman still stood tall, eyes sharp, suit immaculate. The sales associate still floated through the showroom with effortless grace, rehearsed charm, and quiet judgment. Silk still danced in the windows. Perfume still lingered in the air. And no one had any idea that the building itself was now owned by the woman they had once deemed unworthy. Then the invitations went out. Each one arrived in a matte black envelope, sealed in wax, handwritten in gold leaf. No brand name, no sender, just a place, a time, and a single phrase embossed across the top: an evening of distinction, honoring those who inspire legacy. Mary Crockett opened hers slowly, seated at the small desk in her Paris hotel room. At first she thought it was a mistake. She had no ties to fashion, no Parisian connections, just an aching memory of a door that had closed too hard, too fast in her face. But there it was, her full name, elegantly scrawled, Madame Mary R. Crockett. And the location? Maison Decoteau. She froze. The name slammed into her chest like a cold wind. Her fingers tightened on the invitation. Was this a cruel joke, an apology, or something else entirely? The lettering shimmered under the lamp. Formal attire requested, RSVP required, but the note beneath it was what made her heart skip. Your presence is not requested. It is needed. She didn't call Jasmine. She didn't need to. She knew. Somewhere behind this envelope, her daughter's fingerprints were all over it. And yet, this didn't feel like Jasmine's usual boldness. This felt orchestrated, precise, deliberate. Jasmine wasn't just bringing her back to that store. She was bringing her in with power. Across the city, inside the staff quarters of Maison Decoteau, the atmosphere was shifting. Lucille was reorganizing guest place cards for the upcoming private gala. She'd heard the murmurs. Something was coming. Something big. The store was closing early for the event. Executives were flying in. Staff were told to be on their absolute best behavior. And the guest list? It wasn't the usual circle of celebrities and clients. It was strange. Politicians, educators, activists, community leaders, names that didn't normally grace the marble floors of Decoteau. As she alphabetized the stack of names, her eyes landed on one. Crockett, Mary. Lucille's fingers stopped moving. Her breath caught in her throat. Mary Crockett. She saw it, clearly, like it was yesterday. The woman in the worn coat, the doorman's cold refusal, the quiet heartbreak on her face, and how she had walked away, shoulders squared, dignity intact, while Lucille had done nothing. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't random. Mary was coming back. Invited. Publicly, something was happening. Lucille scanned the guest list again. Her heart was beating faster now. These names, they weren't just VIPs. They were symbols. People who had been overlooked, dismissed, underestimated. And they were all being gathered in the one place that had built its reputation on keeping people like them out. For the first time since she started working at Descoteau, Lucille felt her hands shake. She excused herself and slipped into the back corridor, pressing her back to the wall, breathing hard. Her mind was spinning. She remembered Mary's face, not angry, not bitter, just tired, like she'd seen this pattern play out too many times in too many rooms. And now something was about to break. Lucille had spent weeks pretending the day hadn't mattered, that she'd had no choice, that staying silent had been necessary to keep her job. But in her gut, she'd known she'd betrayed something bigger than policy. And now that name was back. Not begging, not shopping. Arriving. Back at the hotel, Mary laid the invitation flat on the desk. The envelope still pulsed with a weight she couldn't quite name. Was she really going back there? Into the same halls that had judged her at a glance? Into a world that told her, without ever needing to say it, that she wasn't worth silk or service or basic courtesy? She stood and walked to the window. Paris blinked beneath her, golden and cold. Her reflection stared back, silver hair, dark eyes, a face that had carried generations forward. And yet somehow that face had still been dismissed as unworthy by a boy in a black suit with nothing but assumption in his gaze. She reached for her closet. She hadn't packed anything for galas. No gowns, no jewels. Just a simple black dress she kept in case and a scarf Jasmine had given her last Christmas. A deep burgundy that made her feel grounded. She laid them both on the bed. This time she wouldn't walk in hoping to be seen. This time she would walk in knowing they'd be watching. At Maison Descoteau, the staff briefing was tense. The manager spoke quickly, instructing everyone to double-check their stations, polish the glass, align the displays perfectly. The guest of honor was still unnamed. Rumors flew like wildfire. An American dignitary, a silent investor, a fashion icon. Lucille said nothing, but deep down she knew. This wasn't just another event. This wasn't just branding or press. This was a reckoning disguised as an evening gala, a slow, quiet reversal of the script that Descoteau had performed for over a century. And Mary Crockett? She wasn't returning to that store for closure. She was returning as the storm. The night arrived with a strange kind of stillness. Not the quiet of peace, but the pause before a reckoning. Paris glittered under a soft veil of mist, and the street outside Maison Descoteau glowed beneath golden lamps. The store's facade gleamed like a crown, marble polished to perfection, windows glowing like stage lights. Inside, staff moved quickly but carefully, adjusting floral arrangements, checking name cards, aligning champagne flutes down to the millimeter. No one knew exactly who the event was for, only that it was critical, and that nothing could go wrong. At 6:58 p.m., a black car pulled up to the curb. The back door opened slowly. Mary Crockett stepped out. She wasn't wearing diamonds, no designer logos, no opulent shawls or glittering accessories. Just a sleek, understated black dress that grazed the ankle, tailored to perfection, a single pearl earring on each ear, and around her shoulders the deep burgundy scarf Jasmine had gifted her. Elegant, unbranded, but powerful in its simplicity. Her silver hair was swept back in a clean, regal twist. Her walk, unhurried, controlled. Not proud, but anchored. She was the same woman who had stood here weeks ago, but tonight she carried something the doorman couldn't measure. Presence, power, memory. As she approached, the doorman, Vincent, the same man who had blocked her path with such casual cruelty, straightened his posture. He didn't recognize her. He saw the dress, the scarf, the composure, and that was all it took to flip his instincts. He bowed. "Welcome to Maison Descoteau, madame," he said with practiced charm, stepping aside, holding the door wide. Mary paused for half a second. Not long, just enough to mark the moment. Her eyes flicked to his face, searching for a flicker of recognition. There was none. He didn't remember the woman in the blue sweater and thrifted shoes, but that woman remembered him. She nodded once without a word and crossed the threshold. Inside, the scene bloomed like a stage set waiting for its lead. The floor glowed under crystal lighting. A small quartet played quietly near the grand staircase. Staff moved like dancers in a silent ballet. The air was thick with perfume and anticipation. Mary's heels clicked softly across the marble floor. She didn't flinch. She didn't marvel. She didn't hesitate. Because this time, she wasn't wondering if she belonged. She knew she did. A young hostess stepped forward with a clipboard. Her voice was bright but respectful. "Bonsoir, madame. May I have your name, please?" Before Mary could answer, another voice cut through the space, breathless, stunned. "Mary! Crockett!" Lucille. She stood frozen just feet away, her black uniform dress crisp, her hair pinned with care, but her eyes wide with something else. Recognition, guilt, awe. The name had struck her earlier like thunder. But the reality, seeing Mary here, radiant, calm, untouchable, was something else entirely. Mary turned. Their eyes met. And for the first time in weeks, Lucille felt her lungs tighten. Not from fear, but from the weight of what she hadn't done. The day Mary was turned away, Lucille had been a silent witness. Too afraid to speak, too new to intervene. And now here was that same woman, dressed in quiet elegance, being honored in the same place she was once told she didn't belong. Lucille stepped forward, almost without thinking. "Madame," she said, her voice lower, steadier. "Welcome back." Mary held her gaze for a long second. Then she smiled, just slightly. Not to forgive, not to forget, but to let her know. "I remember, and I came back anyway." Lucille swallowed hard, stepped aside, and gestured toward the staircase. "You're expected upstairs." Mary walked past her, every step steady and slow, like a clock ticking toward something irreversible. Behind her, the staff watched in silence. Something had shifted, not just in the air, but in the rules. The store hadn't changed, but the center of gravity had. And the woman they once overlooked? She had just walked back through the front door, without ever asking for permission. Upstairs, the chandeliers burned brighter than usual, casting golden light across a room filled with polished shoes, champagne flutes, and the soft murmur of Parisian elites exchanging carefully measured pleasantries. But beneath the surface, a different current moved. Quiet, unfamiliar, uncertain. The usual hierarchy of fashion royalty and moneyed clients felt disrupted. There were unfamiliar faces in the room. Teachers, community leaders, activists, people who didn't wear luxury like second skin, but stood tall as if they belonged anyway. Mary stood near the back wall, close to a balcony overlooking the showroom below. She said little. She watched. Her presence was subtle, but undeniable. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the one scanning the room for someone who might question why she was there. A soft, deliberate note rang out from the string quartet. Low, rising, like the overture of a storm. Then the lights dimmed. The crowd turned, puzzled. From the shadows behind the central staircase, a figure emerged, backlit in soft white, heels echoing with calm precision against the marble. She didn't rush. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. Jasmine Crockett walked forward like a closing argument. The music swelled, then stopped. Silence. Jasmine stood at the edge of the stage. Her black gown shimmered like liquid coal, simple but arresting. Her hair was pulled back, her shoulders square, her voice steady as steel. "Bonsoir," she said, just one word, and the room went still. "I know many of you are wondering why you're here," she continued, eyes scanning the room like a lawyer reading a jury. "And more importantly, who brought you here?" A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. Some recognized her face. Congresswoman, civil rights advocate, rising name in American politics. But what was she doing here? At Decoteau? Jasmine let the silence build. Then with the weight of thunder behind glass, she spoke the words that cracked the room in half. "I am the new owner of Maison Descoteau." Jasmine's voice echoed across the marble floor, steady and clear, slicing through the room's silence like a scalpel. No one moved. No one sipped their drinks. All the curated posture and polite indifference the luxury world had perfected for decades. It melted in an instant beneath her words, because what she was saying didn't feel like a speech. It felt like a verdict. She came here alone, Jasmine continued, wearing a simple sweater and shoes chosen for walking, not for posing. No stylist, no entourage, just hope. She stood outside this very store, heart full, wallet ready, wanting nothing more than to walk in and choose something beautiful for herself. Not out of vanity, not out of ego, but because after a lifetime of sacrifice, she had finally decided she deserved it. A quiet ripple moved through the crowd. Some nodded slowly, others dropped their eyes. Lucille, standing near the back, gripped her hands together tightly. But that day, Jasmine said, her voice tightening with restraint, someone decided with a glance that she didn't belong. Her tone didn't rise. She didn't need volume. The weight was in the stillness. She wasn't told she couldn't afford it. That would have been too obvious. No, she was told there was a private event. She watched three well-dressed strangers walk in ahead of her, doors open wide. But when it was her turn, they closed. The same man who now stands smiling at the door, he closed them. Vincent, standing by the entrance, froze. His breath caught, though his face remained still. But everyone was watching now. My mother didn't argue, Jasmine said. She didn't demand attention. She didn't ask to be seen. She simply stepped back into the rain. She went back to her hotel alone on her birthday and convinced herself it was no big deal. She paused, letting the sentence land like a final gavel. But it was a big deal. Her eyes scanned the room. Every eye was on her now. No more murmurs, no more motion. Because this is how injustice dresses itself today. Not in slurs, not in fire hoses, not in signs above the door, but in selective hospitality, in courtesy reserved only for those who wear the right shoes, enclosed for private events that somehow always stay open for the right people. She took one step closer to the edge of the platform. Her tone softened, but her words hit even harder. My mother doesn't need this place. She never did. She raised 3 children on her own, with grace, grit, and a strength none of you could begin to measure. She survived systems that tried to shrink her. She fed us before she fed herself. She worked double shifts. She marched when it was dangerous. And she never once asked the world to make room for her. Jasmine's gaze settled on the very center of the room. Her voice dropped. She didn't need a scarf to prove her value. This store needed her presence to remember its own. For a long moment, no one dared move. Then Jasmine looked toward Mary. Their eyes met, mother and daughter, across a room that had once erased one and never expected the other. I didn't buy this store for branding, Jasmine said, her voice calm again. I didn't buy it to make headlines. I bought it so that no one's mother, no teacher, no nurse, no grandmother, will ever again be told in subtle language that their dignity is conditional. Her final words struck like thunder without lightning. From this day forward, Maison de Coteau does not decide who is worthy. The people do, and the doors, these doors, will remain open. The room remained frozen, because they all knew something sacred had just been reclaimed. Not just ownership, but meaning. And this time, no one would dare close that door again. The room remained stunned. Jasmine's words still hung in the air like smoke after a cannon blast. She had just stripped away the illusion that Maison de Coteau had built itself upon, and yet her voice was still calm, her eyes focused. She had exposed the wound, yes, but what came next would not be retaliation. It would be reconstruction. She stepped forward, lifting a small card from the podium. Her fingers were steady, but her next words carried weight that made everyone straighten. I'm not here to fire anyone, she said. No one will be publicly humiliated. That's not how dignity works. She let the crowd absorb that. A few faces relaxed, managers, sales staff, executives who had begun to fear headlines and disgrace. But Jasmine's pause was intentional. What came next would demand more of them than punishment ever could. What we're doing is bigger than blame, she continued. We're going to fix the foundation, from the floorboards to the ceiling. Starting tonight, a new logo flashed behind her on the projection screen. Simple, bold lettering, dignity first. This is not a program, Jasmine said. It's a principle. It's how this house will operate from now on. She clicked a remote. The logo faded into three bold initiatives. First, she said, voice steady, 30% of all Maison Decoteau products will now be allocated to what we call the community access tier. These will be high-quality items, same craftsmanship, same experience, but available at significantly reduced cost. A low murmur moved through the crowd again. But only, Jasmine emphasized, to teachers, nurses, paramedics, and public servants. Those who serve, those who give more than they take, those who make this world livable for the rest of us. Behind her, a slide displayed a digital access card, issued via secure verification from government organizations and NGOs. Not charity, not a handout, just recognition, just access. These workers won't come to Decoteau to beg, she said. They'll come to be welcomed. The next slide lit up, numbers, charts, projections. Second, Jasmine continued, 20% of this company's net profits every quarter will be redirected into the Decoteau Scholars Fund. Full scholarships, vocational training, private tutoring, not for legacy children, not for fashion insiders, but for the sons and daughters of sanitation workers, of hospital staff, of delivery drivers and maintenance crews. People shifted in their heels. The air had thickened again. No one had ever spoken like this inside these walls. Jasmine's voice grew quieter, but more piercing. Luxury has always borrowed inspiration from working-class culture, from our stories, from our survival. But it never gives back. That ends now. She let the silence work again, then tapped to the third and final slide. And finally, she said, every frontline employee of Maison Decoteau, from sales advisors to doormen, will be required to complete the Dignity Immersion Program before stepping onto this floor. A few gasps this time. This is not corporate training, she clarified. This is lived experience. Jasmine stepped away from the podium, now speaking directly to the crowd, not like a CEO, but like a witness giving testimony. You will spend 2 weeks volunteering in a nursing home, a women's shelter, or a community food center. You will serve meals, fold laundry, carry trays, listen to stories from people who've lost everything. Only after that will you wear this badge, she said, lifting the new Maison Decoteau staff pin, redesigned with a single word beneath the logo, respect. She paused. The silence this time was longer, deeper. Some of the wealthier guests looked stunned. Others quietly moved. But every face wore the same truth. This wasn't window dressing. This was reform. And reform demanded sacrifice. No one is above this, Jasmine said. Not the board. Not the management. Not even me. She took a breath, then nodded toward her mother. We're going to earn the right to serve women like her. Mary's eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. Jasmine stepped back to the podium. Her voice softened now, but it was the kind of softness that still carried weight like iron. Dignity isn't a gift we grant. It's the minimum we owe. She clicked the remote once more. A final slide appeared, Maison Decoteau. Redefined, and beneath it, crafted with skill, delivered with respect. Jasmine looked out at the room. She didn't smile. She didn't bow. She simply said, the door's open now. Make sure you're the kind of person who deserves to walk through it. And with that, the transformation began. Not just of a brand, but of what luxury could become when power was used to lift, not just shine. As Jasmine stepped down from the podium, the room remained in still silence, not stunned anymore, transfixed. The most powerful woman in the building had just delivered judgment without punishment, change without shame. But for one person, the weight of that moment landed like thunder in the chest. Lucille stood near the rear marble column, her fingers curled tightly around the edge of the welcome tray. She hadn't moved in 10 minutes. Her breathing was shallow. Her eyes hadn't left Jasmine since the first word left her lips. She could feel the blood in her throat, rising not from fear, but from recognition. That story, that woman, Mary, her face, her voice, her pain. She had seen it all and said nothing. For 5 weeks, she'd tried to forget it. She told herself she was just an intern, still on probation, powerless. But as Jasmine spoke, Lucille realized what she had buried wasn't just guilt. It was complicity. She hadn't held the door closed, but she hadn't opened it either. And now that same woman, the one she had watched walk away in the rain, was standing like royalty beneath chandeliers. And Jasmine, who could have fired them all, had chosen something else, something more terrifying. She had chosen to see who would rise when no one was forcing them to. Lucille stepped forward. She didn't know what she was doing. She just knew she couldn't stay still. Her shoes clicked softly as she walked across the marble floor, cutting through whispers and shifting glances until she reached the stage. Jasmine looked at her, calm, expectant, not surprised. Lucille's voice trembled as she took the mic. "I remember her," she said. Gas spread like sparks. "I remember what happened that day," Lucille continued, stronger now. "I saw the way she was turned away. I saw the way no one questioned it. And I saw how she didn't cry or beg. She just left. I wanted to say something. I should have said something. But I was afraid. I was new. I didn't want to lose my job." She looked down, chest rising. "But that's not an excuse. Silence doesn't protect anyone. It just delays the harm for the next person." No one dared interrupt. "I want to help change that," Lucille said, "because if people like me stay quiet, the door never opens." Jasmine stepped forward then, not smiling, but nodding slowly, like someone watching a spark catch fire. And with only a glance to her chief of operations standing nearby, she turned back to the microphone and said, "Lucille," she said, voice clear, "you've just become the first head of human-centered experience at Maison de Coteau." The words struck the room like a bell tower. Lucille blinked. "What?" "You'll lead our dignity immersion program," Jasmine said. "You'll design how we listen, how we observe, how we teach respect, not just as a script, but as a reflex." Lucille's hands shook, barely processing what she was hearing. "You were silent once," Jasmine added, "but you're not silent now. That's all that matters." Applause broke out, not the soft, polite kind this crowd was used to, but something deeper, something real, the kind that comes when someone speaks a truth you've avoided for too long. Later that night, after the event wound down, Lucille sat alone in the now quiet showroom. Her name had already been printed on a new badge. She ran her thumb over the embossed letters. Lucille Delacroix, Director, Dignity First Experience. She laughed softly. A few hours ago, she wasn't sure she'd survive this week. Now she held the keys to the future of one of the most storied brands in France. But it wasn't the promotion that made her tear up. It was something Jasmine had whispered to her before leaving. "Empathy," she said, "doesn't need perfection. Just courage when it counts." And now Lucille had both. The woman who once stood in the corner would now design every welcome. And from that day forward, no one would walk through those doors unseen again. The gala ended. The guests left in waves, some quiet, others wide-eyed, still reeling. But the moment didn't end when the doors closed. That night, the story spilled beyond the chandeliers and marble. It bled into Paris, then into London, then across oceans. By sunrise, the first headline appeared in Le Monde. American Congresswoman purchases Parisian fashion house after mother was discriminated. Hours later, The Guardian followed. A door slammed shut. A daughter bought the building. By noon, the story was global. CNN opened with a special segment. When dignity costs billions, Jasmine Crockett and the Maison de Coteau revolution. BBC called it a retail reckoning. Al Jazeera, luxury, justice, and the woman who changed everything. Silently. Clips from Jasmine's speech went viral across platforms. The moment she declared, "My mother doesn't need to prove she belongs here," was shared over 30 million times in 48 hours, subtitled in 19 languages. TikTok creators reenacted the monologue. Editorials poured in. Fashion critics who once praised exclusivity were now scrambling to redefine what luxury meant in a world where it had just been shattered and rebuilt. But the part that caught fire wasn't Jasmine. It was Mary. News agencies rushed to find more about the silver-haired woman who had walked away in silence and returned through the front door, not with fury, but with grace. They found photos of her from earlier that year, smiling beside neighborhood kids at a local food pantry, speaking at a community wellness clinic in Dallas, walking through the halls of her granddaughter's school with her arm looped through her cane and her posture unbent. She had never sought the spotlight, but the spotlight came anyway. The New York Times ran a headline that morning, "The Mother Who Changed the Model." Time magazine placed her face, dignified, calm, and silver-crowned, on the cover with 5 words etched beneath it: "This door opens for everyone." Fashion magazines, once obsessed with red carpets, began publishing essays about Mary's grace, her quiet strength, her refusal to respond with venom, and the humility that made the movement feel real. Vogue Italia called her a mother who rewrote the script of belonging. In Tokyo, digital billboards flashed her image over the Shibuya crossing. And yet, Mary said very little. Reporters begged for interviews. Offers came from talk shows, podcasts, news channels, even documentaries. But she declined most of them. When she finally spoke, it was at a small press conference arranged by her local church. A plain podium, no lights, just one microphone, and her scarf wrapped softly around her shoulders. "I didn't open any doors," she said gently. "I just knocked. My daughter's the one who decided to buy the building." A soft ripple of laughter. Then she grew serious. "But this isn't just about me. This is about every woman who's walked into a room and felt like she had to shrink to fit it. Every parent who's worked 2 jobs and still been treated like they couldn't afford dignity. This is about being seen, finally." Her words struck harder than a headline. Because Mary hadn't come to inspire. She had simply wanted to buy a scarf, and in doing so, she had rethreaded the entire fabric of an industry. Luxury retailers around the world held emergency meetings. Executives asked nervous questions in boardrooms once known for champagne and control. Who else has our door policies? What happens if this goes viral in New York? Do we need our own Dignity First program? Within a month, 5 major European brands announced new customer inclusion standards. Within 2, Jasmine's Dignity First model had been licensed to 4 international retail chains. But through it all, Mary remained grounded. She still did her daily walks. She still made her own tea. And when someone recognized her at a small flower shop on the edge of Montmartre and asked for a photo, she said, "Only if you let me take one of you too." In the corridors of politics and fashion, she was being called the conscience of the industry. Some wanted to name scholarships after her. Others proposed placing a statue near the new entrance of Maison de Couture. But the most powerful image came from a child. It was a hand-drawn picture sent from a classroom in Detroit. Crayons, markers. A woman with gray hair and a scarf stood beside a little girl at the base of a golden door. On the back, the child had written, "Thank you for opening it for us." Mary placed the drawing inside her travel journal. She didn't say much. She didn't need to, because the world had already heard her voice, even when all she did was walk away in silence. But the impact didn't stop with headlines or hashtags. What Jasmine had done was no longer just retail news. It was global discourse. It had shifted the ground beneath multiple industries and turned a quiet act of justice into an international movement. And within weeks, the invitations began arriving. Not from journalists, not from fashion panels, from world leaders. First, the United Nations. They called it a historic moment, inviting Jasmine to address the General Assembly as part of the annual Summit on Human Dignity and Economic Equality. She stood beneath the blue and white emblem, her voice echoing through the chamber, not as a politician, but as a daughter who had had enough. "This isn't about fashion," Jasmine told the world's diplomats. "It's about the invisible price we put on belonging, about the locked doors that are still disguised as policy or branding, and how quickly we forget that dignity was never ours to grant. It was always theirs to begin with." Applause thundered from representatives across 193 countries. Her words were translated into 42 languages in real time. But no translation could dull the heat in her final sentence. "When we design for humanity, profit follows. When we exclude it, collapse follows faster." Then came the TED Talk. Filmed on a stage framed by soft red light, Jasmine stood alone with nothing but her voice and a story the world thought it already knew. But this time, she didn't begin with her mother. She began with Lucille. "A young woman," Jasmine said, "once stood silently while an older woman was denied basic kindness. She was scared. She was new. But when the moment came to speak, she did. And now she's teaching others how to see what she once missed. The room sat frozen. Then Jasmine leaned forward. Sometimes the bravest people are the ones who admit they stayed quiet, because from that honesty comes the kind of leadership we actually need. The video garnered 18 million views in 3 days. By the time Jasmine stepped onto the stage at the World Economic Forum in Davos, her presence wasn't just respected, it was seismic. In a hall filled with CEOs, policymakers, and tech billionaires, she didn't offer graphs or projections. She offered truth. "We're not here to discuss growth," she said. "We're here to ask, growth for who and at what cost?" She laid out a new model: equity-driven commerce, human-first design, and dignity embedded into brand identity. Not as marketing, but as mandate. Jasmine closed her speech with one line: "We've spent too long building walls that look like doors. It's time we built doors that open in both directions." She received the only standing ovation of the forum. But while Jasmine stood on global stages, someone else was speaking from the floor she used to polish. Lucille. A French magazine had requested an interview after the Dignity First program gained traction across 3 continents. Lucille had declined twice, but this time something pushed her to say yes. The photo was simple: Lucille in a black blazer standing just inside Maison Descoteaux's new entrance, the word respect pinned proudly to her chest. But the words? They hit like confession. "I used to fear losing my job," she said, "so I stayed quiet. What I didn't realize was I was losing something far more important. I was losing my conscience." The interviewer asked her what changed. Lucille didn't hesitate. "I saw someone humiliated and said nothing. That silence followed me home. It followed me into my dreams. But when I saw her come back, dignified, powerful, still kind, I knew I couldn't be that girl in the corner anymore." She paused, then added, "Now I help people feel welcome. Not because it's my job, because it's the least we can do, because every smile, every gesture is a chance to rebuild something we never should have broken." The article went viral across Europe. Lucille became a quiet heroine, proof that dignity wasn't just a policy to enforce, but a culture to practice. Maison Descoteaux began hosting monthly empathy sessions, designed by Lucille, modeled on her own experience. Sales staff weren't just trained anymore. They were transformed. And in the background of every global forum, every headline, and every magazine cover, there was always one silent presence: Mary. She didn't travel to Davos. She didn't walk on Ted's red carpet, but her story sat behind every microphone like a lighthouse behind the fog. Not as a victim, but as the woman who knocked, and whose daughter turned that knock into a movement. And the world, it was finally listening. And when the world finally grew quiet, after the headlines had slowed, the cameras stopped flashing, and the applause dimmed, what remained wasn't just the story of a luxury store or a historic purchase. It was the question that refused to leave. Why did it take power for a woman to be seen as worthy? Because at the very heart of the storm, past the speeches, the stages, the sweeping reforms, there was still one moment that started it all. An elderly woman standing in the Paris rain quietly turned away, not with violence, but with a smile too thin to hold any kindness. Mary hadn't come to make a scene. She came to buy a scarf, and that was what made it all so devastating. She wasn't denied a loan. She wasn't arrested. She wasn't publicly insulted. She was dismissed. And in today's world, that's how cruelty hides. Not in headlines, but in doorways. Not in rage, but in indifference. A nod, a cold shoulder, a closed smile that says, without saying, "You are not our kind." That is what Jasmine saw in her mother's eyes during that call. Not just sadness, not just shame, history, repeating itself, quietly, efficiently, again. It was the same look Mary wore when banks refused her as a single black mother. When landlords looked her up and down before deciding their buildings were full. When teachers pitied her children instead of preparing them. And Jasmine understood. This wasn't about one scarf. This was about all the doors that had ever closed too softly to make noise. So she did what history rarely expects of women like her. She opened one, but not just for her mother, not just for herself, for the nurse who shops in silence, for the teacher who doesn't dare touch the cashier, for the father wearing the same coat to every interview, for anyone who has ever been priced out of dignity. The human message is this: dignity is not something we earn by looking the part. It's not granted through status, style, or spending power. It is our birthright. And yet every day we've allowed systems to behave as though it's something exclusive, packaged, priced, and protected behind velvet ropes. What Jasmine Crockett did was not revenge. It was rebalancing. She did not break the rules. She rewrote the value of what matters inside those walls. And she did it without raising her voice, just by raising her standard. Through Lucille's redemption, we learn that silence may protect us from risk, but it also starves us of purpose. Her confession wasn't weakness. It was a rally cry for every bystander who wants to change sides. And her transformation proved a vital truth. Empathy isn't instinct, it's discipline. It must be taught, practiced, and lived. But the most powerful symbol in all of this was still Mary. She never shouted, she never demanded. She just kept her back straight, her head high, and her voice soft. And the world finally had to listen. Because maybe the most radical act in an age of spectacle is grace. Mary walked away that day not to retreat, but to leave space for something far more powerful than outrage. Justice reimagined, not as punishment, but as a new architecture for belonging. And that is the lesson. True power doesn't just open doors for itself, it leaves them open for others. Because someday someone will stand in the same place you once did, unsure if they're enough. And whether or not they walk through will depend on what kind of world you left behind. That's the real luxury now. Not exclusivity, but a place where everyone feels they were always meant to be there. And that's the door Mary Crockett walked through. And this time, it stayed open. But this story doesn't end here. Because every day, somewhere, someone else like Mary is being turned away. Not with words, not with violence, but with the same cold smile, the same narrowed glance, the same silent judgment that says, "You don't belong here. You've seen it. Maybe you've felt it. Maybe you've delivered it. Now is the moment to ask, what kind of door are you standing in front of? Are you holding it open? Are you watching it close? Or are you brave enough to remove the hinges entirely?" This isn't just about luxury stores or fashion brands. This is about how we treat each other when no one's watching. About what we choose to normalize. About whether dignity is a principle we just quote or something we actively protect. So here's the truth. You don't need to be a congresswoman to change something. You don't need to buy a building, but you do need to speak, to act, to interrupt. Because silence never opened a single door, but courage has cracked open thousands. So hold the door, lift the voice, challenge the glance, redesign the room, not for applause, not for headlines, but so that one day when someone like Mary walks in, no one will ever question if she belongs. They'll just say, "Welcome. We've been waiting." Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference. Jasmine Crockett, a Black woman, was pulled from her first-class seat just because of a simple coat and the color of her skin. But just hours later, she was the one who shut down the airline's million-dollar deal with a red-sealed envelope, carrying absolute authority. What if the person you humiliated in silence turns out to control everything you thought you owned? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. 5:31 a.m. The sky outside Terminal C was still dark, with just a faint blue smudge hinting at sunrise. Inside, the airport murmured with quiet routine. Escalators hummed, coffee machines hissed, and boarding calls echoed without urgency. Travelers moved on autopilot, eyes glazed, bags trailing behind them like sleepwalkers. But when Jasmine Crockett entered, something shifted, not in volume, not in visibility, but in energy. She walked without hurry, but with undeniable intent. Her trench coat, dark slate gray, custom-fitted, swayed just above polished low-heeled boots. Her satchel was worn, but expensive. Soft leather too fine to be casual, too understated to be flashy. She held her phone loose in hand, the screen displaying a digital boarding pass for Flight 227, first class. But before she could raise it toward the scanner, a subtle exchange occurred. The gate agent saw her and froze for a split second. The kind of pause that happens when someone sees something they don't expect and instinctively prepares to reject it. His mouth pressed into a line. Then came the nod. Small, sharp, barely perceptible. To the left, two uniformed airport security officers, stationed near the automated kiosks, received the signal. Like clockwork, they approached. Jasmine hadn't spoken, hadn't moved out of line, hadn't even reached the velvet rope marked priority boarding, executive and first class. But suddenly, she wasn't part of the line anymore. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step to the side," one of the officers said. His tone was low, not aggressive, but final. Not a question, a command, delivered with bureaucratic polish. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. Her voice didn't flinch. "Is there a problem?" she asked, calm and even. The officer didn't answer. Instead, the gate agent responded, barely looking up from his screen. "It's just a quick verification," he said, with the empty smile of someone who's said that before. Jasmine held up her phone, turning the screen slightly. "I'm in 1B, first class." "We understand," the other officer said, nodding. "Just come with us, please." No scan, no beep, no attempt to actually verify what she just said. Only the unspoken, resounding idea that what they saw didn't match what they believed should exist. Behind her, the line barely shifted. A few curious eyes, a few judgmental ones, but not a single word. The man in a navy blazer with a Bluetooth headset glanced at Jasmine, then away, as if the moment confirmed something he'd already assumed. A woman in leggings whispered to her companion, "Maybe she's in the wrong line." No one asked her name. No one asked where she was going. No one asked why. Because in that terminal, at 5:31 in the morning, Jasmine Crockett didn't look like someone who belonged in first class. Not to them. She wasn't led toward her gate. She was funneled, subtly, precisely, down a corridor marked Supplemental Screening, Tier 2. There were no loud commands, no rush of urgency, only the quiet kind of redirection that pretends to be polite, while stripping away the dignity beneath it. The hallway narrowed into a smaller chamber. White walls, stainless steel counters, bright lights that buzzed, like a lie repeated too many times. It smelled like plastic, antiseptic, and paperwork no one cared about. Two officers waited, one young, almost fresh out of academy, the other older, clipboard in hand, with a posture that said routine, not responsibility. Jasmine placed her satchel on the table without a word, hands still, jaw set. She knew this room. It was the kind designed not for danger, but for people who didn't look like they belonged where they were standing. The younger officer unzipped her bag with a kind of practiced indifference, not asking for permission, not offering explanation. His hands moved fast, searching for what? Weapons? Liquids? Something to justify the assumption that had already been made? What he found instead was a matte black folder, thick and tied with a single silk ribbon. He paused. The seal caught the overhead light. Dark crimson wax, embossed with a crest, 3 concentric triangles, and the initials, G.H. Genesis Holdings. He held it up like it was suspicious. "What's this?" he asked, frowning slightly. Jasmine looked him in the eye, voice level. "Confidential corporate material," she said, "not for third-party review." But he didn't stop. He didn't even hesitate. The ribbon slid off with a tug. The wax seal cracked like a bone under pressure. Soundless tension. He opened the folder and laid it flat across the table. Inside, 6 pages of ultra-thin, fiber-woven legal stock, each one marked with serialized security codes, watermarked headers, and embossed stamps of authenticity. Across the top, strategic equity transfer, Genesis Holdings to Havenport Air. Fourth line, final stakeholder signature, Jasmine M. Crockett. Below that, $4,125,000,000. The agent's eyes scanned the text, uncomprehending. "Is this real?" he asked. Jasmine didn't answer. She didn't need to. The numbers spoke louder than she ever could. He kept flipping, reading bits of words he didn't understand. Fiduciary oversight, capital restructuring clause, asset reallocation authority. He whistled under his breath, like it was impressive, not sacred. The other officer leaned in, glanced at the page, then stepped back, as if it were above his pay grade, because it was, and still, not one of them asked her who she was. Not one paused to question how a passenger, a black woman, in a trench coat, alone, silent, came to carry the final vote on a multi-billion-dollar merger. They didn't see her title. They didn't recognize the authority in her name. They only saw a profile. Jasmine stood there, unmoving, watching them flip through pages that could shift stock prices and decide futures. They treated the documents like paperwork, not power. They were too consumed with protocol to recognize they were holding the gate key to the largest airline consolidation in a decade. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten to call legal. She simply observed. Every page turn, every glance between them, every time they failed to tie what they were holding to the woman standing in front of them. They thought they were doing a job. They were, in fact, failing a test. And what made it worse, what made it burn, was that they thought they were being thorough. They thought this was good security, proper diligence. They thought they were following rules, but they weren't checking for threats. They were checking for proof that someone like her didn't belong in first class. And when they didn't find any, they flipped through billion-dollar contracts like they were flyers for rental cars. No apology, no hesitation, no recognition of the damage they were already doing. When they finally closed the folder, seal broken, pages smudged, the agent handed it back across the table, like he was returning a boarding pass. "You're all set," he said. Jasmine took it slowly, retied the ribbon herself. Her hands moved with the kind of care that made the silence heavier. She placed the folder back into her bag, zipped it, and lifted the strap onto her shoulder, without looking at either of them again. She didn't need to, because what they failed to see wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was an institutional reflex, the kind that costs more than lawsuits, the kind that costs power. And today, they had handed that cost to the one woman in the terminal who could write it into history. She stepped onto the aircraft with calm precision, her boarding pass unread, her presence unacknowledged. The air at the door was cool and still. The uniformed flight attendant standing just inside glanced up, then looked straight past her. No nod, no smile, no greeting. Just a flick of the eyes, before turning attention to the white man stepping in behind her. "Welcome aboard, sir," the attendant said, voice bright, eyes warm. Jasmine said nothing. She didn't need to. The message had already been delivered. Her silence wasn't absence. It was the sharpest object in the room. She walked forward, slow and composed, the hush of first class surrounding her like a velvet curtain that didn't welcome, but contained. Seat 1B, front row, aisle, the leather pristine, the tray folded, the blanket untouched. No one standing near it made space for her. No one acknowledged her presence. Another attendant passed with a tray of champagne flutes, offering to 1A, to 2A, then to 2C. She paused near Jasmine, glanced at her ticket stub, visible in hand, then walked on. Jasmine sat, carefully removing her coat, folding it over her lap. She placed her bag beneath the seat, her fingers brushing over the black folder inside, like checking for a pulse. No, can I take your coat? No. Would you like a drink? No, welcome aboard, Miss Crockett. Not a smile, not a nod, not a word. By the time the seatbelt light dimmed, they'd already made a choice, not to confront her, but to erase her, one omission at a time. By the time the seatbelt light turned off, they'd already made their decision, not to challenge her, but to quietly erase her, one small exclusion at a time. The cart came rolling down the aisle, like a ritual, silver handles, polished chrome trays, steam rising from a shallow basin of folded white towels. One attendant led, another followed, like a silent echo. They stopped at seat 1A. Here you go, sir, the lead said brightly, offering a towel with silver tongs and a practiced smile. He nodded, thanked her. The towel passed Ormig easily into his hand. Then, they moved forward. Jasmine watched, the tray shift slightly as it turned toward her seat, then away. No hesitation, no confusion, just a pivot. The same arm that had extended seconds earlier simply didn't. She wasn't overlooked. She was calculatedly bypassed. The towel went to 2A, then 2C, then the cart was gone. Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't tilt her head in question. She'd seen this choreography before, how something as basic as a warm towel could become a declaration of who did and didn't belong. Her hands stayed still, folded gently in her lap, one thumb tracing the hem of her coat sleeve. The fabric was fine wool. Spoke. But none of that mattered here. In this space, attention was a currency, and they had already decided she hadn't earned it. 10 minutes passed. The hum of the cabin deepened. Passengers adjusted their reclines. One attendant moved down the aisle, offering drinks, orange juice, sparkling wine, water. The man across from her received 2 bottles and a second napkin. The woman behind her was offered a choice of red or white. Jasmine waited until the attendant circled back within earshot. She pressed the call button. A pause. Then footsteps. The woman who approached wore the smile of someone prepared to be patient, but only briefly. Yes, ma'am? Jasmine didn't raise her voice. I'd like a glass of water, please. The attendant nodded, turned toward the galley, returned a minute later, empty-handed. I'm sorry, she said, lips tight. Your fare class doesn't include complimentary beverage service. Jasmine paused. I'm seated in 1B, she said. No emotion, just clarity. Yes, ma'am, but certain tickets, promotional upgrades, mileage exchanges, they don't qualify for the full service. Jasmine looked at her for a beat, just long enough for the lie to dry in the air. Would you like to purchase a bottle? The attendant added quickly. No, Jasmine said. All right then, she replied, and moved on. A man 2 rows back chuckled quietly. Leaning slightly into the aisle, he spoke to the flight attendant in passing. She probably got lucky with an upgrade or something, he said. Doesn't seem like the usual first-class type, you know? His voice wasn't cruel. It was worse, casual. The kind of voice that had practiced being comfortable saying things like that out loud. The attendant didn't respond, but she smiled anyway, as if she agreed. Jasmine didn't turn around. She didn't correct him. What would she even say? That she was the one holding the pen that would decide the airline's future? That the paper he was dismissing her over was worth more than his mortgage, retirement plan, and children's tuition combined? Number. That wasn't the kind of truth you said out loud. It was the kind you signed silently. Meal service began not long after. A fresh set of attendants came down the aisle, with a double-stacked cart lined with linen cloth and small bowls of butter. The cabin filled with the smell of roasted garlic, seared meat, a hint of lemon. The process was clockwork. A flight attendant stopped at 1A, smiled warmly. We have 2 options today, herb-crusted chicken or miso-glazed cod. The man chose the cod. She jotted it down. moved across the aisle to 2A, offered the same. Then 2C, Jasmine sat upright, unfolded her napkin onto her lap. But the cart passed. No one asked her preference. No one offered a menu, not even a glance. The attendant near her shoulder checked something on the manifest, turned, and walked on. It wasn't a mistake. If it had been, there would have been surprise in her body language, an instinctive half-turn, an apology, a correction. There was none, just distance, polished, intentional, normalized. Jasmine didn't follow the cart with her eyes. She simply lowered her hand, pressed her palm lightly against the satchel tucked under the seat in front of her. Inside, the folder remained sealed, not legally, but symbolically. The documents inside authorized the final release of $4.1 billion in capital. Signatures, board approvals, a legacy clause, a single line left blank. One she had the right and power to fill. Her fingers brushed over the zipper, slowly, not to open it, but to feel its weight. Every skip gesture, every silent insult, every quiet, perfect way. They told her she didn't belong. It was all being recorded, not on video, but in consequence. And when the moment came, she wouldn't need to raise her voice. She would raise the price. By the time the meal carts disappeared and the cabin lights dimmed, they had tried everything subtle, and now they were ready to try something louder. The cabin had gone quiet again, but this time it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that lingers before something happens, a silence that watches, that waits. Jasmine had not spoken, had not moved, but somehow her presence, her stillness, had become the loudest thing in first class. She could feel it in the air now, the slight stiffness in the attendant's walk, the sideways glances from the man across the aisle, the subtle way the service flow bent around her row. So when the lead flight attendant returned, for the third time, she was already prepared. This time, he didn't crouch. He stood over her. Clipboard gone, smile gone, hands folded in front of him, like someone who'd just been told to stop being polite. "Ma'am," he began, slower this time, "we're again requesting that you move to 17D for the remainder of the flight. It's important for aircraft balance and your safety." His voice was steady, but it held a tension just beneath the surface, the kind that cracks if pushed. Jasmine looked at him fully now. No blink, no shift, just presence. "Has anyone else received the same request?" she asked him once more. Not out of curiosity, but principle. A full second passed, then two. The attendant didn't answer directly. His eyes flicked, to the curtain, then to the service galley. "This is procedural," he said. "It's not about you, personally, but it was, and they both knew it." Jasmine didn't respond right away. She sat back, an inch, exhaled through her nose, and let the silence drag. "I'm fine where I am," she said clearly. No apology, no smile, no room for negotiation. The flight attendant didn't move. Something in his posture shifted. Straighter now, more rigid, like he'd finally gotten permission to stop pretending. He adjusted the cuffs of his uniform, dropped his voice, quiet enough that nearby passengers couldn't hear. "If you choose not to comply," he said, "you'll be marked as non-cooperative. That may result in security meeting you at the gate." It wasn't a warning. It was a verdict. Jasmine's expression didn't change. Her hands stayed exactly where they were, folded calmly in her lap, the edge of the satchel just brushing against her knee. Inside that satchel was a sealed folder, still untouched. The paper inside had more power than the man standing over her could ever imagine. But Jasmine said nothing about it. She didn't threaten. She didn't raise her voice. She only spoke once more. "That won't be necessary. And now, Jasmine decided it was time to stop watching and start acting. She had waited long enough. Jasmine reached into her bag slowly, her fingers gliding past soft leather until they found the envelope, thick, cream-toned, sealed in red wax that shimmered faintly under the cabin lights. She drew it out with care, placing it gently on the tray in front of her, centered like a final card at the end of a long game. The seal was still unbroken. The weight of it alone seemed to change the air around her. Then she pressed the call button. One chime, sharp and unmistakable. The lead flight attendant returned a moment later, his expression unreadable, but his eyes cautious now. Before he could speak, Jasmine lifted her gaze and met his directly. Her voice was quiet, unhurried, unshakable. I think it's time. You knew who you've been serving. Then she slid the envelope toward him, just enough for the red insignia to catch the light and the message to land. The power they thought they had began to wither the second she broke the seal. Jasmine held the envelope like a courtroom exhibit, not as a warning, but as a verdict. The wax seal cracked with a soft pop, the sound small but unmistakable, like a trigger pulled in silence. She didn't flinch. She unfolded the document, slowly, precisely, until it lay flat across her tray table. The heavy cream stock absorbed the cabin's low light, like it was designed to shine only in moments like this. At the top, the header screamed, without volume, "Stakeholder Override Access, Jasmine Crockett." Beneath it, her clearance code, her position, her authority, not as a passenger, not even as legal counsel, but as the final anonymous vote holder on a multi-billion-dollar merger. Her name was there, in serifed ink, not handwritten, embedded, authorized, permanent. She didn't need to say it. The paper said it all. The lead flight attendant leaned forward, instinctively, as if proximity might help him understand what he was seeing. His eyes scanned the first few lines, then darted back to the seal, then to Jasmine's face, and his confidence drained visibly, like a curtain being pulled back, too fast. "Ms. Crockett," he began, voice thinner now, forced into a register, far more uncertain than the one he'd used when telling her to move. I didn't realize." Jasmine looked at him, not with rage, not with arrogance, but with cold, surgical clarity. "My name is Jasmine Crockett," she said, her voice calm but cutting. "I'm the final compliance stakeholder for Genesis Holdings. The vote to release $4.1 billion in capital investment for your airline goes through me, or doesn't." He blinked, stunned. She paused, then added, slower, sharper, "You dismissed me because I didn't look like what you expect power to look like. Because I'm a black woman in a $70 coat, not a designer one. Because I don't speak like I need your approval. You didn't see who I was. You just saw my skin." She let the words hang. He had no place to put them. "No," she said again, "you didn't know because you never thought you needed to." He straightened, as if trying to reassert control, but the effect was hollow. His hands twitched at his sides, unsure whether to grab the paper, apologize again, or disappear. Around them, the quiet in first class had shifted entirely. A woman across the aisle had stopped pretending not to listen. The man in 1A had put down his drink. Someone further back and whispered, "She's someone important," as if they hadn't spent the last 2 hours pretending she wasn't someone at all. The cabin wasn't just watching, it was recalibrating. The flight attendant's apology came too late, too rushed, too reflexive. "Please accept my apologies, Miss Crockett. I assure you this isn't how we—" Jasmine didn't respond. She didn't need to. She turned her eyes back to the document, letting his words and drift into the static hum of the plane. Because now, everything they had done, every skipped towel, every denied drink, every seat reassignment, every whisper, was hanging in the air, like smoke from a fire they swore wasn't burning. This wasn't just about her identity. It was about exposure. She hadn't raised her voice once. She hadn't threatened, filmed, or shouted. But now, every eye was on her. Not because she demanded to be seen, but because, too late, they finally were. And in trying to remove her from the seat they believed she didn't deserve, they had just placed their entire future in the hands of the one woman who could now decide whether they kept flying at all. Revealing who she was changed the room, but confirming it changed the system. With no fanfare, no grand gesture, Jasmine reached into her satchel and withdrew a device that looked almost ordinary until it was opened. A matte black security case, compact, sleek, no logo, no brand, no external signal of value, but the hinge was reinforced. The frame, titanium. This wasn't consumer tech, it was governance hardware. Inside, a secure terminal lit up the moment she flipped it open, its screen, a low glow of anticipation. Her fingers moved with the ease of someone who had done this before. She didn't fumble. She didn't hesitate. Her thumb pressed the biometric reader. One soft click, and the screen blinked red. A pause. Then, green. The home interface unfolded, in layers in one after the other. Trust access, compliance verification, capital signature relay. She tapped the sequence code. 6 digits, each one entered with mechanical certainty. There was no flourish, just confirmation. Her screen responded in under 3 seconds. A pulse of blue light spread across the device, followed by a soft tone that sounded almost like a breath. Transaction authority, confirmed. The font was neutral. The meaning was anything but. That single action had just released a compliance chain across multiple institutions, the kind that didn't wait for permission, the kind that didn't care about tone or attire or assumptions. From that moment, her presence was no longer anonymous. She wasn't a woman in seat 1B. She was the stakeholder, and the system had just remembered who she was. On board, no one else heard it, no chimes, no announcements, but deep within the encrypted network, that governed internal risk at Havenport Airlines. A flag was triggered, a flag that wasn't supposed to light up unless someone very specific and very powerful made it do so. A passenger profile updated, Flight 447's cabin log spun for a second, recalibrated itself, and issued a silent, urgent ping marked Alert. Strategic Identity Activation. Level 1. The aircraft's operating system rerouted the signal to a dormant protocol hub reserved only for board-level compliance scenarios. It bypassed flight crew. It bypassed public-facing alerts. Within 7 minutes, a flash encrypted message reached the direct terminal of Havenport's CEO. No subject line, no explanation, just her name, her clearance, and one bold status line: Crockett, Jasmine, override access. Live. The system didn't need to explain. It just stopped moving beneath her. Back in her seat, Jasmine closed the terminal and placed it back in the case without a word. The sound of the latch clicking shut was almost delicate, like sealing a decision that could not be undone. She didn't look around. She didn't look at the flight attendant, who was now standing, a little too still, near the galley. She didn't even glance at the man across the aisle, who had once assumed she was sitting in the wrong section. She didn't need to. They felt it, even without understanding the tech, the code, or the language. They felt the shift, because power has a weight to it when it finally lands. And Jasmine carried it, like she had always known, exactly where it belonged. She sat back into her seat, not with satisfaction, but with certainty. Her hand rested again on the armrest, fingers still, breath steady. The sky outside the window hadn't changed, but the altitude had. She didn't need another word, another apology, another seat offer. The document was signed. The line was sent. And now, the plane flew differently, not because of turbulence, but because for the first time, all morning, everyone on board finally understood who was flying with them. Sometimes, you don't need to raise your voice to be heard. Sometimes, one line of confirmation is enough to flip the balance of power at 36,000 feet. The plane had landed, but the real turbulence was only just beginning. The moment the wheels touched the runway, something invisible but powerful kicked into motion. Inside Havenport Airlines secure systems, every transaction linked to the $4.1 billion Genesis Holdings deal was frozen. Accounts locked. Fund transfers halted. Smart contracts deactivated. In real time, monitors in the finance division blinked. From green to gray. No explanation. Just a single red flag flashing across terminals. Temporarily suspended. Tier 1 stakeholder override activated. No one had ever seen that level of clearance used before, and no one expected it. To come from a silent passenger in seat 1B at Havenport's corporate headquarters, far from the calm cabin Jasmine now sat in, the CEO's private inbox lit up with an urgent, encrypted message. No greeting, no attachments, just one short, cold paragraph. Confirm violation of ethical conduct involving a Tier 1 passenger. Immediate internal investigation required. All transactions suspended pending official review. It was signed by hand, E. Dumont, chair of the Genesis Oversight Committee. The name alone sent a ripple of silence through the boardroom. Phones buzzed, coffee was left untouched. A meeting was called within 10 minutes. Someone asked aloud, "Who is Jasmine Crockett?" And another, lower voice answered, from across the table, "She's the one who can approve or cancel the entire deal." No one asked further. That was enough. Back on the plane, Jasmine hadn't moved. She sat quietly, not needing to raise her voice, not needing to explain herself. What she had done, activating her authority, was already speaking louder than any confrontation could. She didn't have to argue, didn't demand, didn't post anything online. Her confirmation code had done it for her, and now, the people who thought they could ignore her were learning something far more unsettling. Real power doesn't need to announce itself. It just needs one line of confirmation to change everything. The plane was back on the ground. But for the people who thought they'd left judgment behind at 36,000 feet, the real descent was just beginning. Within 40 minutes of Flight 447's landing, an encrypted access key was used by Havenport's Internal Ethics Division to unlock the aircraft's full-service dataset. This wasn't routine protocol. This was a Class A audit trigger, a security-level event that bypassed departmental approval. Every piece of data from the flight, passenger logs, cabin footage, service timestamps, headset audio, compliance checklists, was fed into the airline's forensic analytics system. The AI flagged 15 anomalies in under 8 minutes. 9 involved Seat 1B. 1 involved a skip manifest signature that matched Jasmine Crockett's drink denial. 3 were cross-referenced with crew audio. Nothing had to be interpreted. It was all there, recorded in the sterile, impartial memory of a system that doesn't forget. No emotion, no excuses, just action, indexed, time-coded. The machine didn't care about intent. It recorded impact. The audio file was short, just under 20 seconds, but it hit like a thunderclap in the ethics review chamber. One voice said casually, "She doesn't fit in first class." Another replied with a low chuckle, "Probably use points." A third, on a more distant, "Yeah, definitely not our usual profile." The comments weren't shouted, they were whispered, exchanged with the confidence of people who believed they were behind the curtain of professionalism. What they didn't know was that every uniform worn on board was equipped with live audio backup for cross-shift training reviews. The exact technology, designed to protect them, had now become their undoing. The audio wasn't blurry, wasn't disputed. It was sharp, clear, lined with quiet disdain. Played back through boardroom speakers, it felt louder than it ever did on the plane. Once the evidence was played, the room fell silent. Not one of the department heads said a word. Not legal, not HR, not flight ops. The ethics committee chair, a woman who had defended staff for years, slowly removed her glasses and placed them on the table, like she was stepping away from a responsibility she no longer wanted. "This isn't about tone," she said. "This is about belief, about the kind of story they thought no one would ever tell." A few seats away, a senior VP closed his laptop without finishing his sentence. Another official, pale and stunned, asked, "How long did this go on?" The answer came from a data analyst in the corner, quietly reading from a printed log. 7 recorded instances over 2 hours. No recorded violations until she boarded. All violations stopped after she revealed her identity. Termination notices were drafted before lunch. 4 employees dismissed on the spot. 1 tried to call the union. The union declined to intervene. The evidence was too clear, the cause too justified. The company's legal team signed off with one line: termination under Ethical Breach Clause 5B, prejudicial behavior in the course of premium tier service. There was no fanfare, just badge deactivation, uniform collection, and permanent revocation of long-haul status. Internal access revoked across flight crew scheduling systems. Their names were removed from elite route rotations, then flagged in red for audit memory storage. They weren't just off the roster, they were off the record. Across internal channels, Havenport issued an emergency bulletin: Flight 447 findings, immediate operational action. It laid out the investigation results with brutal clarity, followed by a message from the CEO himself. This is not a customer service failure. This is a failure of recognition. We saw the badge and ignored the person. That ends now. All high-tier customer service departments were placed on temporary review. Cross-functional diversity retraining, scheduled at every hub. Flight leads received an updated passenger conduct protocol memo by end of day, and yet Jasmine never demanded any of this. She never raised her voice. She didn't ask for revenge. She simply sat in her seat, calm, unshaken, and let the system expose itself. Because real justice doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives in silence and writes everything down. The comments that once passed as jokes were now evidence. The subtle exclusions, now policy violations. The people who once felt confident enough to whisper had underestimated the one woman who didn't need to speak at all. And the system that had once tried to erase her was now rewriting itself because of her. The plane had landed. The passenger had disembarked. There was no confrontation at the gate, no shouting, no social media posts going viral. Just a quiet woman stepping off Flight 447 and into the terminal. Her envelope sealed, her mission complete. But somewhere, in the upper floors of Havenport Airlines headquarters, the silence she'd left behind had become something else entirely. A signal. At 9:14 a.m., the executive elevator dinged open on the 28th floor. The room they entered wasn't labeled War Room, but it might as well have been. Polished, windowless, soundproofed, off-grid, secured by facial recognition. 6 people entered. Malcolm Drayton, the CEO, jaw clenched, tie slightly loosened. Laura Sedge, general counsel, clutching a legal folder like a loaded weapon. Yvonne Cho, director of risk, already pale and sweating. Two crisis consultants from Sentinel Strategies, stone-faced professionals, trained to help corporations survive their own arrogance. And finally, the quietest man in the room, a representative from Genesis Holdings. No nameplate, no introduction, just a black folder on the table. Its seal bore 4 embossed letters, GSEC. Nobody offered coffee. Nobody made small talk. The air was already heavy, with something that didn't need to be said. Drayton broke the silence first. We contain. We don't confess. We move fast. Fix it, then forget it ever happened. Clear? No one responded, but no one disagreed. Laura opened the folder. Flight 447, she said calmly. Surveillance footage, cabin audio, internal communication logs, all time-stamped, all verified. No redactions. She slid printed transcripts across the table. Underlines, marked in red ink. A color that looked like blood against white paper. She doesn't fit in first class. Probably used points to upgrade. Not our usual profile. Drayton stared at the page. Tell me these weren't caught on passenger video. Worse, Laura said. They were caught on our own crew network. Audio pulled from closed-channel comms and overhead mics, all synced with the service log. Everything she was denied in towels, drinks, even the meal, matches the timestamps where these lines were spoken. Ivan leaned forward, already defensive. So, we do what? Apologize? Compensate? That's when the Genesis rep spoke. His voice wasn't cold. It was clinical, like someone stating an autopsy result. She doesn't want your apology. If she did, she would have demanded it by now. Everyone turned to him. She could have leaked this. She didn't. She could have sued you. She didn't. She could have tanked your stock by lunchtime with a single interview. She hasn't. What she did was far worse. Drayton frowned. What's worse than that? She watched, she waited, and then she pressed a single button. That paused a $4.1 billion transaction. The room fell completely silent. No threats, no headlines, no press conference, just one verification code. Transaction authority confirmed. From seat 1B, you didn't even offer her water. Ivan shifted, uncomfortable. So what does she want now? Nothing, the Genesis rep said. And that's what should scare you. She already has what she came for. Leverage, evidence, control. This wasn't an escalation. It was a test. Drayton's fingers tapped the table. Then what's our move? Lara passed a second folder. Genesis sent us this, she said. A formal ethics evaluation and a request to overhaul our Tier 1 stakeholder protocol, effective immediately. The first line of the report was printed in bold. This breach was not operational, it was cultural. The Genesis rep added, almost as an afterthought, she doesn't want revenge. She wants a system that doesn't need her to intervene. By 10:45 a.m., an internal-only message went live on Havenport's executive network. Subject: Urgent Stakeholder Event Response Protocol following the verified override action issued by a Tier 1 Genesis stakeholder. All personnel tied to Flight 447 are temporarily removed from premium service assignments, pending full investigation. Immediate review of high-tier passenger engagement SOPs is underway. Compliance and retraining partners have been activated. No names were mentioned, but everyone on the inside knew exactly who the memo was about, behind closed doors. Another conversation started, this one more nervous, less strategic. Should we reach out to her? Someone whispered. Make an offer? No, Laura said sharply. She didn't ask for anything. If we offer, we look guilty. If we stay silent, we look scared. Either way, we lose. And they were already losing. Jasmine hadn't shouted, hadn't accused, hadn't tried to burn down their house. She simply let them hear the echoes of what they'd built. What stunned them most wasn't what she did. It was what she never had to. That afternoon, Havenport created a new classified archive on its secured cloud server. It was labeled Stakeholder Override. Crockett, Jasmine inside were three items: a digital screenshot of the moment she activated the override. Transaction Authority confirmed a full transcript of internal crew chatter in service logs from Flight 447 and a one-line note left by the Genesis rep before exiting the room. The real problem isn't that she was the most powerful person on that plane, it's that no one thought to treat her like a person at all. No one dared delete the file. No one would ever forget what it meant. And from that day forward, no one in Havenport Airlines dared underestimate silence again. There were no cameras waiting at the gate, no headlines screaming justice, no flood of interviews or statements from Jasmine Crockett. In fact, for most of the world, Flight 447 never even made the news cycle. It was just another early morning route between cities, carrying executives and consultants to places that barely required introductions. But what happened inside that cabin didn't end with the landing. It moved differently, like pressure beneath a fault line. Quiet, slow, and impossible to ignore. Once it started cracking through the surface, the first tremor came from a blog post, titled simply, "I sat 2 seats away." It was written by a passenger in 3C, a mid-level executive at a mid-sized firm, with nothing to gain by speaking. He didn't try to go viral. He posted it anonymously on a professional network forum where business travelers vented about bad coffee and canceled flights. But this one wasn't a rant, it was a confession. I saw her get skipped during meal service. I saw the flight attendant pretend not to hear her, and I said nothing. I watched a black woman with a first-class ticket get treated like she was in the wrong seat, in the wrong place, wearing the wrong coat, and I didn't say a word, I just looked away. He ended the post with one line: "Maybe the worst kind of complicity is thinking you're just minding your business." It didn't go public. It didn't trend, but it was shared over private Slack groups, email threads between managers, inner office chats, marked off the record. People didn't repost it. They forwarded it, whispered it, sat with it. Then came the second ripple, a letter, not typed, handwritten, scanned and shared through the internal HR loop at Havenport Airlines. The author didn't sign their name. They didn't need to. I didn't scream. I didn't insult. I didn't call her a name, but I made choices. I walked past her seat when she asked for water. I smiled at others, but not at her. And when someone whispered, "She probably used points," I didn't push back. I laughed, not because I meant it, but because I didn't want to be the one who made it awkward. That laugh is what I hear when I try to sleep now. That letter circulated further than anyone expected. It made its way to flight crews not even involved in 447. It was printed and tacked anonymously on the bulletin board of a crew lounge in Atlanta. A regional manager forwarded it to his entire team with just the subject line, "Read this before you board today." None of this happened on the news, but everything was changing anyway. 3 days later, an internal ethics committee at a major hotel group emailed Genesis Holdings, requesting a copy of their stakeholder conduct framework. No formal partnership, just a quiet question. Can we learn from what happened on Flight 447? A luxury concierge company altered their internal scripts to remove tier-based assumptions in greeting protocols. An international bank sent a memo to their airport lounge staff, instructing that all guests be addressed by name. No rank, no status-based shortcuts. No one said why, but everyone knew. The most telling change didn't come from policy, it came from posture. A senior director at an international logistics firm sent a company-wide message after reading the cabin transcript from the Jasmine incident, a document that had leaked discreetly through back-channel HR networks. This isn't a DEI issue. This is a dignity issue. We can't automate respect. And when people like Jasmine walk through our systems unseen, it's not because they're invisible, because we trained ourselves not to see them. Someone on his team printed that out and taped it to the wall of a regional office. Weeks later, it was still there, faded, but untouched. No photos of Jasmine ever circulated, no interviews, no quotes. But the image people held was vivid. A black woman, seated in silence, fingers resting on a sealed envelope, absorbing exclusion in real time and not breaking. One Fortune 100 executive wrote in a private investor Slack group, "She never raised her voice. And yet, here we are, all of us reviewing protocols and holding emergency meetings. Imagine what would have happened if she had." But the truth was, Jasmine didn't need volume. She didn't need a platform. She had presence. She had silence, sharpened to a blade. And when systems ignored her, that silence became a mirror. Not for her, for them. 1 week after the flight, the Genesis representative who attended the internal Havenport meeting was overheard saying this over a secure call. "We've seen what power looks like when it's loud, but Jasmine proved something else, that the most dangerous kind of power is the one that doesn't ask to be noticed. It simply waits for the moment you forget it's there, and then reminds you who's holding the pen." And that's exactly what she'd done. Not through statements, not through scandal, but through sequence, through stillness, through letting the system tell on itself. The story never hit mainstream outlets. No articles, no hashtags, but it moved. From inbox to inbox. From crew lounge, boardroom. From policy checklist to personal shame. And that movement, slow, steady, unflinching, was louder than any headline could ever be. Weeks passed. The world didn't explode. No press scandal. No TV segment. Jasmine Crockett never said a word publicly. Her name never trended. But behind closed doors, in rooms with no cameras and few windows, something far more profound was happening. Quiet as it began, it kept moving, like water under a foundation, reshaping the structure itself. At Genesis Holdings, the quarterly executive report listed Jasmine's name only once, at the very bottom, in the smallest font, under compliance override and stakeholder activity. But in the internal circles, that single line had weight. It read, "Final signature validated, Crockett, J. Tier 1 override confirmed." What it meant, she had resumed the $4.1 billion transaction. What it didn't say, she signed it under new terms. Havenport Airlines had been forced into silence after her verification, but not into inaction. Behind the scenes, they implemented changes so quickly, it stunned their own middle management. A full overhaul of their Tier 1 passenger engagement protocol was launched, not because they believed in it, but because they now feared the cost of not believing in it. They created new escalation workflows for any onboard interaction with unidentified premium status travelers. They partnered with an outside behavioral ethics firm, not to improve PR, but to satisfy Genesis's newly updated compliance clause. Active respect must be observable, not performative. The clause had one author, Jasmine. She never asked for a press conference. She never called out names. But when she re-signed the merger documents, she attached a one-page rider. It didn't include threats, just expectations, measured, enforceable, non-negotiable. Equity doesn't mean apology. It means structure. Build it. And they did. Meanwhile, the industry watched, not from the front page, but from internal emails, secure investor bulletins, and hush-hush crisis playbooks passed between CEOs. A luxury hotel chain quietly sent a directive. Tier-based courtesy audits required monthly. A global credit card concierge service launched a dignity detection workshop. A 5-star airline updated their app with an anonymous passenger feedback vault, a system eerily similar to the one Jasmine once suggested in an internal Genesis pilot 5 years earlier. She was never named, but the fingerprints were hers. A VP at Havenport, in a confidential leadership call, summed it up best. This wasn't PR disaster recovery. This was systemic exposure. And we were lucky. She let us fix it before anyone else found out. But Jasmine didn't do it for them. She did it for the people who would come after, because there would be others. Other who wore $70 trench coats instead of $700 ones. Others who carried silence because they'd been taught the world only listened when it had something to fear. Others who wouldn't have a red-sealed envelope in their bag. Only dignity, resilience, and just enough composure not to explode. The real change wasn't that the system bent for Jasmine. It's that it now had to bend for everyone who looked like her before it knew who they were. Genesis quietly archived the event as a benchmark. Internally, they called it Flight 447, the Catalyst Memo. Inside were three things: Jasmine's final override log, time-stamped, a full behavioral analysis of the flight crew and their decisions, a new clause issued to all Genesis partners. Human assumptions may not override stakeholder authority ever again. Meanwhile, Jasmine returned to work, not in an office, but in the same quiet rhythm she always carried. She resumed her silent oversight of transactional portfolios, compliance chains, stakeholder identity protections. She received no award. She refused every internal commendation. But one day, a junior legal clerk at Genesis asked her quietly in the elevator, "Was it hard? Sitting through that flight?" Jasmine didn't answer right away. Then she said calmly, "It wasn't hard. It was familiar. And that's the problem." The clerk nodded slowly. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," she replied. "Build something better." And so he did. So did others. Piece by piece, policy by policy. Years from now, no one will remember the name of the crew. No one will remember the gate agent. But somewhere, in a procedural binder or a code of conduct, someone will read a clause that exists because a woman refused to move from seat 1B. And that will be enough, because justice doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it walks in quietly, sits down, and never leaves. So the plane landed. The deal was paused. The boardrooms went silent. And Jasmine Crockett walked off Flight 447 without a word. No camera flash followed, no interviews, no hashtags. Yet even without headlines, the ripples spread like heat under a door. Not because she demanded a reckoning, but because her presence forced one. This wasn't the end. This was the moment where excuses ran out and accountability had nowhere else to hide. The truth? It was never about a glass of water or a towel or a seat. It was about a woman, a Black woman who entered a space designed to reject her silently and chose not to play the game of proving she belonged. She didn't fight back with volume. She didn't pull out a phone. She didn't raise hell. She just endured, watched, documented, and when the time came, flipped the entire structure from the inside out. Jasmine Crockett wasn't erased because she was invisible. She was erased because the system couldn't compute her. She didn't fit the algorithm of powerful. Wrong coat, wrong skin, wrong silence. And in a world obsessed with the optics of authority, she represented the most threatening thing of all: power that doesn't ask for permission. They saw a woman who didn't look like the VIPs they'd been trained to recognize. They didn't see her sealed envelope. They didn't see her override credentials. They didn't see her role in deciding the future of a $4.1 billion merger. They only saw what they were conditioned to expect, and they acted on it. This story is not just about what happened. It's about what keeps happening. How many flights have you sat through never noticing the woman who was skipped twice, the man who wasn't offered help with his bag, the child who was assumed to be flying alone because their parents didn't fit the image of affluence? How many names were ignored? Because they were hard to pronounce? Bias doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always scream. Most of the time, it smiles. It wears a uniform. It's polite. And that's why it's dangerous. Because when injustice is performed with a calm face and a clipboard, it becomes almost impossible to challenge without being labeled as difficult, aggressive, or non-compliant. And still, Jasmine did not retaliate. She could have. The tools were in her bag. But that wasn't her message. Because this wasn't about vengeance. It was about reflection. She held up a mirror to the system and said nothing. Let them look. Let them see themselves. Let them realize. They didn't just skip her. They exposed themselves. And when they realized the gravity of who she was, the one person with final approval power over the largest transportation investment of the quarter, it was too late to rewrite their behavior. That is the core of this story. Power isn't always loud. Dignity doesn't require credentials. Silence isn't weakness. And justice doesn't need a platform. It needs receipts. Jasmine Crockett didn't demand change. She required it. Her silence wasn't absence. It was structure. It was pressure. It was the kind of silence that forces others to hear themselves, their tone, their patterns, their excuses. And when the lights came on, nobody looked heroic. So what now? Do we walk away and call it inspiring? Do we repost it and say, wow, powerful? Do we wait for the next Jasmine to show up and remind us again? Or do we sit in the discomfort long enough to ask ourselves, how many times have I been the one who looked away? Because this story is not rare. Jasmine is not a unicorn. What happened on Flight 447 isn't shocking. It's textbook. It's just that this time, the person in seat 1B had the power to make it visible. What about the people who don't? The women who never get offered the drink? The ones who don't make it past the velvet rope? The passengers who don't have an envelope, only dignity, resilience, and just enough composure not to explode? This is for them, for every person who's ever been seen as out of place for simply showing up in a space they earned, for the first-generation graduate on a business trip who gets questioned twice, for the woman in sneakers and silence who gets treated like she wandered into the wrong class, for the passenger who gets asked, are you sure this is your seat? This story is your reflection and your record. It says you were never the problem. The system was. And now, thanks to one woman who didn't flinch, the system has to answer for itself. Behind closed doors, they're rewriting protocols. They're sending out memos. They're firing staff. They're launching audits, not because of a lawsuit, but because of a lesson. A lesson taught without shouting, without hashtags, without threats, just presence, just proof. Just one seated woman holding the future in her lap and refusing to let disrespect define her story. And that is the most radical thing of all. Because in a world trained to dismiss anyone who doesn't meet its visual expectations of power, Jasmine Crockett didn't just break the mold. She reprogrammed the entire interface. And if you're still reading this, you're now part of that reprogramming. So remember this. The next time you walk through an airport, the next time you board a plane, the next time you sit across from someone who doesn't match the executive profile in your mind, look again. Look with new eyes, because the person you're ignoring might not just hold power, they might hold the power to change everything. And if they don't, they still deserve more than what Jasmine got. They deserve a smile, a menu, a seat, a name, a welcome, because basic respect should not require credentials. Let this be the lesson. Flight 447 left behind. That in silence, There is weight. That in restraint. There is strategy. That in dignity. There is resistance. And that, the most unforgettable revolutions, are not always the ones that scream. Sometimes, take their seat, open a sealed envelope, and rewrite the rules and quietly, while everyone else scrambles to understand how the world just shifted. And when history looks back, it won't remember the turbulence. It will remember the stillness of a woman who simply sat in her seat and made an entire system stand up. So now you know. You've seen what silence can do, what dignity looks like under pressure, what happens when a woman refuses to shrink inside a space that tries to erase her. But the question that remains, the one we leave in your hands, is simple and unforgiving. What will you do with it? Will you scroll past it, file it under thought-provoking, and keep moving? Or will you let it burn just a little in the place where your assumptions live? Because the truth is, Jasmine Crockett didn't go through that flight just to be remembered. She went through it so no one else would have to. Injustice thrives in comfort zones, in politeness, in not my place to speak up. It thrives every time someone witnesses a wrong and chooses silence over risk. It thrives in assumptions, passed off as instincts. And if you felt even a flicker of anger, shame, or disbelief while reading this story, then that spark belongs to you. Use it next time you're in a boardroom, on a flight, at a gate, in a service interaction. Pay attention. Who's being seen? Who's being ignored? Whose voice is getting cut off? And whose presence is being quietly denied? You don't need a red sealed envelope to make an impact. You just need the courage to notice and the guts to say something when the script is playing out in front of you. Because Jasmine didn't stop the system alone. She cracked it open. It's our job to make sure it doesn't close again. This isn't about performative kindness. It's not about diversity optics or brand alignment. This is about respect without condition, about seeing someone and choosing to serve, not because they look like a VIP, but because they are a person. So we ask you, be the interruption, be the pause, be the one who said, no, that's not how we treat people here, even if it's just a towel or a drink or a seat, because those small things, they carry the weight of every large injustice that's been allowed to pass. As procedure, share this story, talk about it, not for views, not for clout, for change. Send it to someone who's in charge of people, to someone who thinks they've never made a biased decision, to the one who trains your customer service team, to the one who writes your policies, to the person who says, this doesn't happen here. And when they say, that's intense, tell them, yes, because it's real, because it was quiet, because no one stopped it until one woman made them listen without ever raising her voice. Now, raise yours, use your platform, use your presence, use your seat, whatever seat you've earned, to do something with this, because if you're not disrupting it, you're repeating it. And Jasmine Crockett didn't survive that flight so we could stay comfortable in ours. So buckle up, speak up, and never, ever again, stay quiet when someone is being quietly erased. The world doesn't need another viral headline. It needs 100,000 quiet revolutions. Be one. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.